Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the 72nd episode of Fraternity Foodie. I can't believe we are this far. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. We call these episodes Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like good food to bring people together. Today, we have an absolutely fascinating story that you are not going to hear anywhere else. We have with us today Adam DeRito, and you are about to hear his story about attending the U.S. Air Force Academy. And this story completely blew me away. I've read all the newspaper articles, I've heard about the court case, but having Adam here in person to tell us this story is so much better for our listeners. And I think everybody is going to be absolutely fascinated with Adam's story. So welcome to the show, Adam.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the invite on your show. I really appreciate it.
Of course. I think you are going to help literally thousands and thousands of students by telling your story and sharing it. But let's start from the beginning. You decided to enroll in the U.S. Air Force Academy in 2006. Now, most of the students that I work with, they typically would choose a more traditional university path. You decided that you wanted to go into the military academy. So why did you choose the U.S. Air Force Academy?
Yeah, so for me, it's a unique situation. I mean, I knew I always wanted to go into the military since I was in third grade. And ironically, if you look back at my sixth grade yearbook, it says, I want to become an aeronautical engineer and go to the Air Force Academy. And even my teacher, Mrs. Kissack at the time, thought I was crazy. She's like, you're 12. You don't know anything. Like, what are you talking about? And, but for me, mostly, I mean, it was growing up in New Jersey that caused that factor. I grew up in a pretty, low-income family, blue-collar family. And my parents pretty much said, if you want to go to college, you're going to have to do it yourself and go for free because we can't pay for college. So, and I got into every university I applied to. I worked my butt off in high school. I didn't think I was the smartest person, but you have to have pretty good grades to get into one of the federal military academies, that being the Air Force Academy, West Point, Annapolis, Coast Guard Academy, and Merchant Marine. So I got into all of 5 service academies, and I had my choice. And West Point was actually closest to my house. I lived about 35 minutes or so from there. And for me, growing up and going to air shows, I was like, wow, you know what? I just want to go fly planes. And I didn't even know you could fly planes in the other branches at this time. So for me, I got accepted. And I had gotten ROTC scholarships to go to Penn State University, Embry-Riddle University in Daytona, and Prescott and out in Arizona. But for me, it wasn't a full ride scholarship. So if I wanted to go to school for free, I had to pick one of the service academies. And I kind of grew up skiing in New Jersey at Mountain Creek. And I hear the skiing's a little bit better in Colorado. So I figured that going out to Colorado would be my best bet. And I got into my dream school and I went out for basic training 4 days after I graduated high school. So
wow. That's absolutely incredible. I actually grew up in Rockland County in New York. So growing up, I spent a lot of time over there at West Point, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's just stunning.
It is.
So I'm glad that you got a chance to check that out, and eventually you made your way to the U.S. Air Force Academy. Now, what's interesting is, and I kind of read through the newspapers, but I'm really just fascinated by your story. While you were at the U.S. Air Force Academy, you worked as an informant for the Academy going back to 2009 and 2010, and your mission was to look for misconduct within the U.S. Air Force Academy. So what situation led you to be chosen for this role to be an informant?
Yeah, and this is actually new information for you, Michael, because actually after my first podcast with Andy Stumpf, I found out one of the real reasons I got recruited for there, because for the past 10 years, I've had private investigators working on this case. So back in 2000 and I believe 8, this is before smartphones, before even Facebook was really a thing, but most of the cadets of the Air Force Academy did online dating. So, it was the easier way to meet civilian women because we couldn't go off base all the time. We don't have a real big social life at the Air Force Academy. So I was on this dating app and on this dating website, and I had sent an email to this individual, and I think I stopped contacting them probably around September of my sophomore year. So a few months later, about Christmas time rolls around, we come back from Christmas leave in the beginning of January, and I get called from my commander saying, you have to go talk to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And I had no idea what the Air Force Office of Special Investigations was, but they're basically the Air Force equivalent to the FBI, right? So they're a much higher ranking federal law enforcement agency than your standard Air Force military police or whatever, right? So I get called into this office and they sit me down and they say, hey, Cadet DeRito, is this your civilian email address? And they show me like a piece of paper with my civilian email address written on it. I said, yep, that's it. And they said, were you sending these emails? And they showed me a series of email threads. And I said, yeah. And then they said, were you sending it to this email address? And I said, well, I guess so, because that's what you're showing me on this email thread. And they said, well, did you know that this person that you were talking to was underage? And I said, no. Now, from the email thread, this person had said they were 19, the same age as me. Now, this is also before, like I said, smartphones or anything else. You couldn't even text over 140 characters. I never called this person. I never met them in person. It was strictly on email. Now, they told me at the time that Colorado Springs Police Department had come to them with this email address saying that my email address was attached to a series of email addresses that were in this person's inbox. And they said that they were forwarding the case to the Air Force. Now, consequently, at the time, I had no idea what that meant. And you would figure that if there is a civilian agency talking to the military, nowadays, that civilian agency would interview that person. I was never interviewed by anybody from Colorado Springs Police Department. It was strictly the Air Force Office of Special Investigations telling me that this is what was going on. So I believed them. But then they said, well, hey, you're not in trouble. No big deal. You had no idea. But how would you like to work for us? Trying to find cadets who they had a real big, at the time, they had a real big problem with prescription drugs, sexual assault, and rape at the academy, and underage drinking from prior enlisted airmen. So they asked me, hey, we just want you to be our ear. When you go back to the academy, if you hear anything, there's a couple email addresses you can email us on through Gmail or Hotmail or whatever it was. And then we're going to route that information, and then we'll take care of the law enforcement side of it. But, who knows cadets better than cadets themselves? So I took their word for it, and my commander at the time had no idea what went on in that meeting. And he pretty much told me, well, you're going to get a letter of reprimand for misuse of government network for using your civilian email on a government internet server. And I said, okay, well, whatever. It wasn't a big deal, wasn't a big thing. So I moved on from there. And but then I find out 10, 12 years later that there is no record in the Colorado Springs Police Department of them ever contacting the Air Force Office of Special Investigations or the Air Force Military Police concerning Adam DeRito, my email address, or my social security number. So what we have basically determined from the evidence that was presented to us since our federal court case hit was that this was the way that Air Force Office of Special Investigations was recruiting undercover informants by blackmailing them, making them think that they had done, probably some misconduct, and then coercing them to work for them under the belief and under the guise of they were helping the academy and without any conditions, of getting in trouble after that. So that's how I became an informant for the Air Force.
Wow, that is a story. And this sounds like a book in the making. Unbelievable. So you filed a report in 2009 with the police and the academy that you were a victim of sexual assault at a party in Fort Collins. So I'm curious, what happened at that party that night? And then what was the response by the academy after you filed the report?
Yeah, so a few months after that, I decided that the Air Force was really no longer for me, but I had already committed at that time. So after you stay 2 years at the academy, you have to stay in the military for a minimum of 5-year service. Now that summer, I had gone and flown F-16s with an instructor pilot down in Eglin Air Force Base, Florida. I thought it was an amazing experience. And then they showed me the new F-35 stealth fighter facility down there that they were building. And they told me that, if you want to go fly these stealth fighters, then you have to go to the Marine Corps first. So I decided I wanted to be a Marine. So that summer, I came back, and I was gearing up to get ready to go to Marine Officer Candidate School, which is required by the Marine Corps before you can so-called cross-commission at graduation. So right before I left for Marine Officer Candidate School, my roommate and our next door neighbor in our dormitory, they were going to go run the Fort Collins Marathon. And they asked me, hey, can you drive us up there and drive us back? You're getting ready to leave anyway, so you're not going to be doing anything crazy. I said, no, that's fine. So we all get in my truck and we drive up there, and we meet up with some mutual friends at Colorado State University that we had met at football games and stuff over the years. And, we get invited to this party, and I go to this party. Now, for Air Force Academy cadets, college partying is not a thing. We don't go to college parties. It's a dry campus pretty much. So for, cadets, hey, we're going to go to like a normal college party. That sounds like fun. So, we go to this party. And for me, it was really weird because I was never really a big drinker or anything, growing up through high school or whatnot. And when I got there, I was being handed drinks, and, you're not thinking of anything. You're just trying to be friendly, try to get along with the college population, right? But then I noticed that the Air Force Academy cadets that I went up to there with had left me there, and I was by myself. And then at around midnight, 1 o'clock, I was handed another drink. And from there, like I played rugby at the academy, and I was like 235 at the time, pretty big guy.
Mm-hmm. And
I instantly blacked out in about 10 minutes after finishing that drink. So I was pretty sure, after the fact that I had gotten drugged or something was put in my drink. I woke up the next morning. I had no idea where I was. I was in some dormitory with some people that I had no idea who they were. My cell phone was dead, but at least my truck keys were still in my pocket. So I noticed that there was something wrong. I looked down my underwear and I realized that I had been assaulted that night. And there was, I'm by myself and I have no way of contacting anybody. Now I'm late, probably going back to the academy the next morning. I still had a night pass, but I was still late on reporting back on time. So I get back down to the Air Force Academy and I tell my commander what had happened. And he immediately, based upon my previous interactions with him, he's like, "You're lying. You're just late. You don't want to get in trouble." So I still wanted something to get done about it. And I actually ended up calling the Fort Collins, Fort Collins University Police Department after that. And I made a full report. They actually found who the person was that I was with that night in the dormitory based upon the building I said I was in. They ended up finding out that this person actually, was persona non grata at the academy, or not at the academy, at the university up there. So there was a big investigation on that person. But unfortunately, since it was a week after the fact and I didn't immediately go to the hospital, there was no physical evidence. And a male reporting sexual assault, no one believes you, especially back in 2008. I'm going to be honest. No one's going to believe that a male person who's 235 pounds and plays rugby for the military, was sexually assaulted at a party. But these civilian police officers actually did believe me 100%, based upon the stories, based upon the interviews that they did. So my handlers at the time, because I was still working as an informant, actually come up to Colorado Springs Fort Collins Police Department. And they actually say, "Hey, you know what? We're going to take this case off your hands. He's ours. We're going to take care of it." So I thought that Air Force OSI was going to help me, that they were going to help bring justice to the case, get my commander to understand what was really going on at the time. And unfortunately, my commander just sandbagged me over it. He's like, "Well, you were late for showing up to formation," which is a thing in the military. "So, you're just going to sit, 20 hours of confinement in your room in service dress." So after being sexually assaulted, after having a legitimate civilian police report in the system, even after this person had a restraining order against the academy placed against them and against me for not talking to me or trying to contact me afterwards, my commander still punished me for it. So for me, that was the hardest thing, was as a male victim of sexual assault, was no one believing you. And the Air Force law enforcement agencies, they didn't really help me at all. I mean, the biggest help that I got was actually from their civilian counterparts. So.
Wow, I am so sorry that you went through this. This sounds like a nightmare. So later in 2010, you were then accused of a crime that's known as fraternization. What does that mean, and what happened there?
Yeah, so to be clear, fraternization is not really a crime. It's just it's an article in the Uniform Code of Military Justice that states that it's a rule that only military members abide by. So in the military, fraternization is anything from drinking, gambling, talking to a higher ranking individual to a lower ranking individual. That's pretty much what fraternization is. Mm-hmm. Now, during my time as an informant, I was involved in a large investigation at the Air Force Academy Preparatory School. Most of the preparatory students that we were investigating, there's about 30 of them at the time, were recruited NCAA athletes participating in something, I guess, in the civilian side, they'd be familiar with their red shirt year, right? So they come to the preparatory school to get an extra year of academics bring up before they're allowed to go to the actual Air Force Academy. This person in particular, he actually is public information. His name is Jameel Cooks. He was under investigation for raping and sexually assaulting a fellow candidate at the time. And I was involved heavily in that investigation, and anyone at that party or anyone else. So what the Air Force Office of Special Investigations set up for us was that, well, at least myself at the time, I didn't know there was others until years later, and to avoid this whole fraternization look, they would set up a so-called CrossFit workout program, which would allow myself to go down there as a higher ranking cadet to go see these cadet candidates early in the morning. And basically what I did during those workouts was I'd gather information from these preparatory school candidates about who was running the parties, who was bringing the alcohol, who was putting the drugs in the alcohol, or, who was involved in everything else that we were trying to collect. So, most of my investigative work stopped in September of 2009 with that case. I handed it over to Air Force Office of Special Investigations. But several of those NCAA athletes were caught in a cheating scandal at another drinking party in December of 2009 at the time. So in order to avoid them getting in trouble, they had conspired with the Air Force Academy Preparatory School vice commander. His name is Lieutenant Colonel Eric Rocky. Eric Rocky knew at the time that if 30 of his students are magically dismissed from their preparatory school, that's most of the incoming class of recruited athletes. The Air Force Academy spends an exorbitant amount of money on recruiting athletes to come to its Division I school. Even though it is a federally funded institution, the Academy makes an enormous amount of money on football, volleyball, baseball, hockey, everything else. So to lose 30 of its prime recruited athletes, convincing them to come to this Division I school, would cost the Academy a lot of money. This particular commander had called these cadet candidates in and had them write the same statement that Cadet DeRito was in a relationship with these candidates at the time, even though I was investigating them and collecting information from them. So the Air Force Office of Special Investigations was well aware of this, and they had told my commander, hey, he's been working on these investigations and everything else, but my commander actually decided to try to bring up an Article 15, which is non-judicial punishment in the military. So in Article 15 is basically you're not admitting guilt, but you're accepting a punishment, a military punishment, in lieu of going to court-martial because you believe that the evidence they're going to present against you, you might not win. Now, I was advised at the time by my civilian counsel to just sign whatever they said, because normally in Article 15 in the military, you don't get kicked out for that. It's basically just a big paperwork slap on the wrist. Mm-hmm. My commander had brought me in for questioning with the same agents I'd been working with for years. I was brought into an interrogation room for about 11 hours all night, and they pretty much had me write out a statement of the entire incident, what had gone on at that party, and everything leading up to that. They bought me dinner. I mean, this is a typical standard information gathering session that I normally give in the OSI. But on this one, they walked out of the room, they came back in, and they said, we believe everything that you've written on this 11-page statement, but you have to admit that you were in a relationship with these people because there's no way of you not proving that you didn't because there's no evidence. So I had no attorney, no rights were read to me. It's 2:00 in the morning. I just said, well, what do I have to do to make this go away? They just said, all you need to do is write the word yes on this piece of paper. They threw out my statement. They came in with a pre-written confession, against any, constitutional rights that we as Americans have. And they just said, if you just sign the word yes, the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to get an Article 15, and then you're going to move on with your life, and this all goes away. And that's when things drastically changed for me. I wrote the word yes, and immediately I was, given an Article 15. They said I was guilty of fraternization, even though, like I said, Article 15 is not admitting guilt. And then my commander after that spent the rest of my time, because it was about 3 months out from graduation at this point, trying to get me out of the Air Force Academy before graduation.
And that seems like that's exactly what they did. They expelled you just before graduation. And then all of a sudden you're hit up with this huge bill for the education that you received at the Air Force Academy. So how did all of that happen?
Yeah, so that's where it gets really interesting is they really had, like I said, an Article 15 is not something that people in the military normally get kicked out of the military for. It's not. It's normally like, hey, you're going to stay, an extra half month's pay is going to be taken off, and then you move on to your, the rest of your career. Mm-hmm. And at this point, I wasn't a perfect cadet. I made my fair share of mistakes as a cadet, but, nothing congruent to what would most college students would do in the civilian world, to be honest.
Mhm.
And I was set for graduation at the time. I graduated Marine Officer Candidate School. I was granted my pilot slot with the Marines. I was leaving the Air Force upon graduation, but they still at the time couldn't get me out of the military for any of my so-called cadet misconduct, right? There was just not enough things to actually kick somebody out of the military. I passed all my classes. I passed all my finals, made it all the way to graduation week, even marched in the parade the day before the actual Thunderbird flyover, when our speakers come in. And then 3 hours before graduation, they said, you're going to get late grad. So you're going to stay here for an extra 30 days and you're not graduating today. So I'm like, okay, fine. If that means I can't walk at graduation today and I have to wait an extra 30 days as part of my Article 15 punishment and not take leave, I'll take that. 30 days comes up after I'm just basically hanging out by myself at the Air Force Academy. 30 days comes up. The superintendent, Lieutenant General Mike Gould, calls me into his office. He sits me down. He says, did you learn your lesson? I said, yes, sir. I'm ready to move on with my life. He says, get out of my office. 20 minutes later, military police show up in my dorm room and say I have 4 hours to leave the Air Force Academy and I owe the Air Force over $200,000 and they're also not going to be granting me my degree. And talk about working your entire life to get to this point, going to your dream school, completing finals, getting into your dream job, so to speak, and then it instantaneously being taken away in 20 minutes. And I'm not going to lie, Mike, that was the hardest day of my life. I'm out there by myself. I have no family, no friends, no nothing, and they're basically armed guards there with a K-9 unit telling me to pack my stuff and get off base.
My goodness. I mean, what a story. I mean, I can't even believe I've read lots of this stuff in the media and in newspapers, but hearing it makes me so angry that something like this could happen to somebody. Unbelievable. So I guess, moving forward, then in 2015, you enlisted in the Colorado National Guard. What were your impressions in being in the Colorado National Guard? How was that training compared to your prior experiences at the academy?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the caveats to my case is that the Air Force knows that, if you don't complete the Air Force Academy,
Mhm.
the Air Force allows you the option to serve back that time enlisted. And if you serve back your time on the enlisted side, you don't have to pay the academy back for your education. They tried to ensure that I was never going to be able to do that. They knew that they didn't want me to enlist. They didn't want me to do anything. They wanted to financially destroy me. So that way I had no way of recourse fighting the academy legally. And I got really lucky. So in 2012, I got a job in the oil and gas industry. And the oil and gas industry actually provided me the financial means I needed to actually hire a competent legal team. And in doing so, I actually completed a second undergrad at UC Denver and completed my master's degree at UC Denver Business School in 2015, my Master of Science. So I was actually completely independent of the military at this time. I didn't need the military to supplement my resume, so to speak. But in 2015, we found one more loophole. That loophole is actually the Colorado National Guard. And the fascinating thing about the Guard is that my discharge paperwork was actually good. I got a general discharge under honorable conditions. There's nothing bad about that discharge. But what was really weird about it was that it was signed with secretarial authority. And that means the Secretary of the Air Force, who instructs the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, who is directly connected with the Superintendent of the Air Force Academy. I know that sounds like a big, long line of people in the government, but basically it's the equivalent to 3 steps down from the President of the United States signing my discharge paperwork for a non-criminal offense at all. Like I don't, and to this day, there's nothing on my criminal record, no nothing, right? So that by itself is really abnormal, and it seems very intentional. So it said on my discharge paperwork that I was never allowed to serve in the military ever again, basically, even though I have never been charged with a crime. However, that's a federal DD-214, which is your discharge paperwork. The Colorado National Guard actually was aware of my case, ironically. I was that kid that walked into the office and they said, wait, are you really that DeRito guy that's been in the news? They're like, we've basically been waiting for you to come into this office. And this old sergeant first class who's probably been in the Army for like 30 years cracks open this like old Hogwarts book that just has dust all over it, right? And he just looks at it and goes, there's a rule sitting right here. And it says that the governor of the state is the commander-in-chief and can actually override your federal discharge paperwork without having to go through the red tape of the federal government. And he said, but there's 3 conditions. He's like, 1, we can't give you your commission off the bat, even though you've earned it and you've completed your degree and you've completed all your officer training. So you're going to have to go in enlisted. 2, you're going to have to serve in a special operations unit, because you're going to basically have to prove your worth and prove that you're worth a damn to the Army. And 3, you're going to have to serve in one of those mission critical MOSs. And an MOS is basically a job code in the military. So I said, okay, well, what are my choices? And they said, well, you have 2 choices if you want to go into this unit. And they pretty much said, you want to be a generator mechanic or do you want to be a parachute rigger? And I had jump experience with the Air Force, since I did do jump school at the Air Force Academy. I said, well, you know what? I'll go and be a parachute rigger. Why not? So I went back through basic training, which let me tell you, at 28 years old, it is a far, far different experience going in when you're 10 years older than everybody else. And all your drill instructors think that you're an undercover criminal investigation detachment unit guy. They're like, wait a minute, DeRito, wait, that's the guy in the news. He was an undercover informant. So I got these drill instructors that are my age pointing at me going, don't trust this guy. He's here to screw us out of our careers. I said, I know this sounds odd, Staff Sergeant, but I'm actually here to serve my country. They're like, no, you're the guy that's been in the news. So to be honest, I had it pretty easy through Army basic and Army training. 1, I had done it in the Air Force. I had done it in the Marine Corps. So by the 3rd time around, if you can't figure it out by then, probably shouldn't be in the military, right? Basically, right place, right time, right uniform, shut your mouth and don't talk unless you're spoken to. And everything works out just fine. But trying to explain that to a bunch of 18, 19-year-old kids is a fascinating experience. And I said, I promise, James from Detroit, Michigan, if you don't talk and you just do exactly what they say, I promise they won't make you do push-ups. But a lot of young, strong, alpha male-headed people go into the military thinking they're going to change the Army, and I promise you're not going to, right? So, so for me, it was a very, very humbling experience, and I'm actually grateful for the experience because I got to see what it really is like being enlisted and what it actually is like to lead people that are 10 years younger than you, and having them learn from your mistakes. Like, hey, I was your age. I did the same thing. Don't do that, and your life will be easier. So I got along really well with my instructors, and I went to jump school. I went to Fort Benning, which was amazing. That was actually a lot of fun because I didn't know until I got to Fort Benning, my jump wings from the Air Force don't count in the real military. They only count if you go to Fort Benning and do static line jumping with, at the Army Paratrooper School. So great experience, a lot of history down there. They're still using stuff from World War II down there, which is actually pretty cool. So you get to train on some of the same equipment that the guys who jumped in Normandy are jumping off of. So that's actually kind of fun. So I got back to my unit, and I was assigned to a special operations unit in Colorado, and most of it's older people. So it's, most guys are retired, served several deployments in Afghanistan. So, my commander looks at my paper and goes, Air Force Academy, Marine Officer Candidate School, why are you here? And I said, sir, to be honest, I'm here to just earn back what was taken from me all those years ago. And my chain of command has been great with me. They've been very supportive of me progressing in my Army career and trying to get back what was taken me from the Air Force. So.
Wow. I am so glad that you found that crew at Colorado National Guard and they did right by you because, man, you've been through the ringer. And I'm just so glad that turned around. But it wasn't all done yet because in 2017, you then wanted to become a helicopter pilot, and you found out the Academy listed several psychological conditions on your record. How could that happen?
Yeah, so I really try to move on with my life after 2010, right? The Air Force isn't going to fix things. I need to go out and turn my own life around. Like went and got another undergrad, got my master's degree done, found an amazing civilian job, got a competent legal team. I don't need the Air Force Academy anymore, right? The Colorado National Guard is allowing me to serve in an amazing position with an awesome unit. And now they're even allowing me to go commission again. They're like, hey, so we go out to Utah and we're doing this training. We're doing a jump training for our free fall guys. And I meet up with a bunch of guys, and they're actually Apache helicopter pilots. And I get into a big conversation with them, and they said, you should go talk to our commander. So I actually go out and meet with their commander while we're out there at Camp Williams in Utah. And he said, I tell him my whole story, and he goes, all right, here it is, DeRito. I'm going to give you your shot back. He's like, you're clear. You've been in the Army for 2 years now. No issues. You're serving in this unit. He's like, obviously, you know what you're doing. You have a great career. You're an engineer. You have a Master of Science. He's like, I just need you to basically show up and take this flight training. And I was already a pilot, at the time. I had been a sport pilot and had some FAA, licensing experience. So I go and pass my Army aviation exam, 86%. I go down and get my final medical check. I get down to the last guy that was signing my orders to go to Fort Rucker, Alabama to start pilot training. And he goes, I'm sorry, soldier, I can't let you go. And I said, what are you talking about? Now, this is after getting letters of recommendation from like my lieutenant colonel, battalion commander. I mean, everybody and their mother was like fully supportive of me finally being an officer again. And they said, you have several psychological conditions listed on your medical report from the Air Force Academy. And I said, how is that possible? Now, the weird thing about this is that I already went back through military entrance process screening in 2015. None of this stuff came up. I had gotten to a special operations unit and I hold a security clearance. So if anything was on my record, it definitely would have came up there. But I find it very odd that only when I was applying to be an officer to go fly airplanes or helicopters at the time, that magically something was input into my record. So he's like, we can't let you fly. And the Army knows. They're like, okay, so this stuff is listed on your record now. We need to go get you checked out because technically, if this stuff is true, we have to unpack every parachute you've ever packed. So the Air Force kind of put me in a jam right there, right? So the Army goes back and they send me to all these doctors. They get reevaluated. Everything comes out clean. They're like, yep, there's nothing wrong with you. So the Army goes and tells the Air Force, he's our soldier. He's under our command. He's no longer under your jurisdiction. You need to change the records because you don't own him anymore. And then the Air Force goes, no.
Wow.
So then we go back and we do a FOIA request in 2017. Nothing comes back to that. We finally get an initial record report, and it says that the records were modified without any real specific dates on them. But it looked like the date was a year after I was discharged. Now, how is that possible? So I was a civilian in 2011, and it's stating that my record was changed in 2011. So now you're telling me that someone in the Air Force is modifying my medical records when I'm a civilian. That's a felony. That's a huge problem. So with this information, my lawyers craft a letter, and we actually give it to the superintendent, General Silveria at the time. And we give it to him at the academy and said, we found this information. Something's wrong here. Basically, if you meet these requirements, you give me back my degree, you give me back my commission, and you take this off my record, we won't file a federal lawsuit. They sent us a letter back 2 weeks later and said, no, to be completely short. So we said, okay, so we filed a federal lawsuit, and nothing happens until only a few months ago. And what was really odd about this is that the Chief Justice Bremer of the 10th District Court, takes control of this case. That's very uncommon. A Chief Justice doesn't take control of just any case, right? So this Chief Justice comes back and he says, there is no law in the military or in federal statute currently that states that the military can't falsify your medical records. So since there is no law stating that they can't falsify your records, then we are not making a decision at this time. Now, technically, we didn't lose that motion to dismiss. Then this is where it gets even more peculiar. Chief Justice Bremer ruled without prejudice, which means he's allowing us to refile because he knows that the evidence we have is substantial. If there was any doubt in the federal court system that our case didn't have any relevance, it would be thrown out with prejudice and it would be out of the system completely. Mm-hmm. Now, this is where it gets even more weird. We get a phone call the week after that motion to dismiss given to the Air Force Academy stating that Chief Justice Bremer's office is mandating mediation between the Air Force Academy and myself because he wants to keep it out of the federal court system. He's basically like, you guys need to talk and figure this out because the government doesn't look good in this aspect. So we go to this 4-hour meeting. We talk for about 20, 30 minutes. We give our list of demands, and they're pretty simple, Mike. I have never asked for anything more than I have earned. I mean, I am the easiest person the federal government's ever dealt with. I'm like, please give me what you owe me, my degree, my commission, change my medical records, and I go away. That's it. Mm-hmm. I'm not asking for anything other than what I've earned. And they said no after 4 hours. So So we go back and now we're in the process of refiling for the appellate court. So now the 10th District Court of Appeals, we filed with them 2 weeks ago, and they have to make a decision. Either Chief Justice Bremer was wrong and it goes back down to the 10th District Court, or he was right and we move on to the Supreme Court, which is ridiculous considering, I mean, I'm just a nobody, right? I mean, I'm not special. I'm not a significant person. But I mean, the really odd thing about this case is that, and what we made permanent in our appeal was that I'm a civilian at the time that the Air Force modified my records. So at the time, the Air Force Academy is making the argument of the Ferris Doctrine. And I don't know if any of your listeners are familiar with the Ferris Doctrine, but basically the Ferris Doctrine states that military members can't sue the military for injuries sustained while serving, whether that's combat injuries, sexual assault, anything like that, right? However, I'm not suing for medical malpractice. I'm suing for the fact that you changed my medical records as a civilian. So basically, Chief Justice Bremer's rule is stating that the military has basically unlimited power, that it has power over civilians if that motion to dismiss stands, right? So and I know the story sounds like absolutely insane, but I promise you this gets worse, Mike, for your listeners.
Oh
So we have a motion to dismiss, and we're like, okay, we're going to go to the appeals court, and we're going to ride the constitutional argument. Now we can go into the weeds about who said, he said, she said, but 10 years later, it's hard to prove a lot of those things back then. But what we can 100% definitely prove is that, one, I was discharged on this date, on June 25th, 2010. I was given modifications to my medical records in like September 17th of 2011. And complicate things even more is what we're going to get to next, is that we find out who this doctor was. This doctor at the time did not have a license to practice in the state of Colorado. Now, I've never met this doctor. I have no idea who she is. And in the military, there is, it's like being a lawyer, right? You can have a license in a different state, right? And you can still practice in the state that the military has you serving in, right? But the caveat to that is that if she's modifying a civilian record and she's treating a civilian and not a member of the military, then she has to have a license in the state that she's practicing. So if I'm a civilian in 2011 and she doesn't have a medical license to practice in the state of Colorado, that's also, that's actual medical malpractice. So we did file with the Colorado State Licensure Board, and she's currently under investigation. We actually did offer her immunity. We found out who she was. The sheriff's office showed up at her house where she currently lives, and we basically offered her a deal. If you talk and you tell us who told you to do these things, then you're off. She immediately demanded protection from the U.S. Attorney's Office after that, which I find very odd, right? This is where it gets really conspiratorial. But why am I so important, right? It doesn't make any sense. So weird enough is 2 weeks after the motion to dismiss was given, I get a letter in the mail and I get a phone call. And the phone call is from some master sergeant at the Air Force Academy. And they ask, Major DeRito, is this you? First of all, I'm not a major. That's interesting. Well, we finally were given authorization to release your medical records to you from your FOIA request from 2017. Would you like them? Well, that's convenient that I'm finally given my FOIA request 2 weeks after the motion to dismiss was granted. So I said, absolutely, Sergeant, please mail those records to me. So I got these records, and one, I'm listed as a major. So now it's showing that I never was actually discharged from the military at the time. My DD-214, which was signed with secretarial authority, was not properly filled out, and my orders were still valid to the Marines and the Air Force should I have stayed in the Air Force at the time. So this entire time, I've basically been apparently active duty, getting promoted the entire time with no knowledge of this, and I am at the rank I would have been if I had stayed in the military for the past 10 years, which would be major. On top of that, we find out that the records were modified several more times after that. And it shows in plain ink with names, dates, and timestamps when the computer was accessed, who accessed them, what their names were, and it's very suspicious. There is no medical diagnosis for any mental health issues at any time when I was a cadet up into my discharge. But 1 year or almost 18 months to the time, all the records change mental health-wise when I'm a civilian. Sorry about that, people. Living in the country, you lose power sometimes.
That's all right.
COVID-19 has taught me a set of skills in survival, recommend generators. Anyway, so we find out that this doctor, where she is, where she lives, we ask her to just talk. Because obviously, I mean, this is a low-ranking officer in the Air Force, right?
Mm-hmm.
She has no power. She doesn't know who I am. She's never met me. So why would it be of interest for her to modify my medical records? She immediately asks for protection from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and that in itself was really weird. So my case went from Adam DeRito versus the United States Air Force Academy and John Doe's 1 through 50 being all of the conspirators in this case, to Adam DeRito versus the United States of America, which is like ridiculous.
Wow.
So now she has protection from the U.S. Attorney's Office. She's getting all these powerful federal government lawyers backing her, who are coming up with all these crazy motions to try to get the case dismissed without actually analyzing the evidence. And like I said, so now after our FOIA request was fulfilled 2 weeks after the motion to dismiss was granted, I'm listed as a major. My medical records were 100% falsified. It's in black and white, names, dates, and timestamps. So we had submitted an appeal to the Air Force Board of Military Corrections. Now, the Air Force Board of Military Corrections, we provided them all the evidence to the case, basically saying that the records were modified, everything that happened at the Air Force Academy. Obviously, there's something wrong here. We would like Adam DeRito reinstated to what he had earned at the Air Force Academy. The Air Force Academy affiliated doctor who affiliates with the Air Force Board of Military Corrections actually came back, and this is posted on our website, and stated there is no evidence to substantiate the changes in his medical records, and they must be changed. The Air Force refused to change them. Even their own people are saying that there's something wrong here, the records need to be modified, and they said no. So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. So their own people are saying the records are falsified, they need to be changed. The federal judge is mandating mediation, knowing that the evidence is substantial, and they're refusing to change them. So most people are going to ask, why is this so important? Why are they so intent on making sure that Adam DeRito's case stays out of federal court and the evidence is not presented to a jury? Well, the answer is NCAA sports, Mike. The reason is that those people, and the one I can definitely 100% speak on was Jameel Cooks. He was court-martialed for rape and sexual assault. Everyone else had gotten off. All of those investigations that I participated in, they basically said, well, this guy apparently is crazy, according to Air Force records. We're going to throw out all of his investigative work. Years down the road, we find out there's more informants. Eric Thomas, who also went public. There's Operation Gridiron for people who are interested in looking at that ESPN short that he went public with. Out of the 30 people that I investigated, 28 of them are serving as military officers today in our U.S. Armed Forces, who are predators, people who committed sexual assault, right? And that's concerning. And the biggest issue is Division I sports in the NCAA. I mean, there is no rule in the NCAA that states that people who are convicted of sexual assault can't play football. This person, Jameel Cooks, who was convicted in court-martial of sexual assault, was only given 90 days time served. And that time served in prison wasn't in Leavenworth. It wasn't in prison. It was considered time served sitting in his cadet room awaiting his own court-martial. Jameel Cooks walked out of the Air Force Academy with a dishonorable discharge, and don't get me wrong, that's not good, for a background check. Mm-hmm. But he just went off to Alcorn State University to play football again and was potentially being recruited to the NFL after that. So you're telling me that the person who was convicted of rape in the military served no actual jail time, went on to play football, and was potentially earning a multi-million-dollar contract afterwards. And he's only one example, Mike. And like I said, I won't speak to people that I can't 100% point to paperwork and proof in the news. That's not fair to anyone else. But I can 100% use him as an example. This is not uncommon. And that is the one thing that the Air Force Academy is ensuring, even after 10 years of fighting this in federal court, is that if my case is not vindicated into my affirmations, is that NCAA sports are going to take preference, especially in Division I. Division I sports earn a lot of money for a lot of institutions, and military academies are no exception. Even the person who accused me of fraternization, NCAA athlete. She was an NCAA athlete. and her career was deemed more money worthy than the cadet who was going to cross commission into the Marine Corps, right? So those are just the hard facts. That's what the evidence points to. And it just shows that why are our federal military academies focusing so much more on sports than they are in developing officers of character that are going to be leading potentially men and women into war? So.
Wow, that is profound. Certainly, there's a lot of cases out there in the media that I'm familiar with involving NCAA athletes, and local police, coaches, a lot of other people looking the other way, and then they go on to professional sports. I mean, this is something that you see over and over and over again. I'm wondering, from your standpoint, what advice do you have for today's college students that are victims of a sexual assault?
So, and these are actually the changes I'm actually trying to bring about, and hopefully with people listening to your podcast, by helping us write Congress and helping us write the court system. There are things that we can do in the college atmosphere that will actually help prevent sexual assault. And there are things that we can 100%, especially like my example I can use in the military, that will help you get results in cases of sexual assault much more sooner. One is that the federal military academies, and I know a lot of graduates don't like hearing this, is that we should not be labeled as Division I sports teams. Our main focus needs to be on officership, development, and fighting in combat and humanitarian missions and everything else. If the Air Force Academy, Annapolis, and West Point took away their Division I titles and dropped down to Division II or III, they're going to be attracting a different type of population, which are more focused on actually being officers. Actually, ironically, the lowest rates of sexual assault out of all the military academies are at the Coast Guard Academy and the Merchant Marine Academy, which are not Division I schools. So we can use statistics to show that. Two is that the military should not have any holding over sexual assault cases at all. They should have no jurisdiction. And this goes for your students that listen to your podcast as well. You need to immediately report to the civilian authorities of the county or whatever city you're located in. In my case, that's actually what helped me the most, was reporting to Fort Collins Police Department. If I had just left it up to the Air Force, there would have been no record. There would have been no restraining order, nothing placed against that person. Now, granted, not much happened for justice in my case compared to that, but that person did have to leave me alone, and they were banned from trying to contact me. So that did help in my case. So for your students, I know it's hard, especially for people like me. It took me almost 10 years to be able to tell my story to people like you now. And, you feel ashamed, and sometimes you're getting victim blamed constantly. A lot of people who didn't even know me at the academy have no problem saying, well, I heard that DeRito guy was a bad person, and that's just how it is. And in a tight-knit community like at the Air Force Academy, that's hard, because I love the school that I went to, Mike. Don't get me wrong. I went to my dream school, and some of my best friends are still from the Air Force Academy, and we still hang out today. All I want to do is better the Air Force Academy. I want to help it solve its deep-rooted problems it has with corruption when it comes to sexual assault, and its chain of command, which is mostly focused on careerism and NCAA sports. And it's a simple fix, and when you're going out to these parties, and obviously you're going to have a lot more fun at a civilian college than you are at a federal military academy, I promise you. Go with someone that you trust, and go with a buddy, right? For me, growing up through high school, I was known as Designated DeRito. That was like my nickname. It was a joke. I was a firefighter and EMT when I was in high school. So my friends always used me as the guy who would drive people around. It's not a bad idea to always have that one person in your group of friends who is always willing to answer the phone at 2 a.m. to come get you no matter what. Today we have apps like Uber and Lyft, and those are great ways of, getting out of bad situations, for the most part, even though they've had their individual problems when it comes to sexual assault and rape. But for the most part, there's a lot more options now than there was 10 years ago when I was a college student at 18, 19 years old, right? So but the most important thing you can do is immediately report to the authorities as fast as you can. And if you do have physical evidence, is to get that evidence. Unfortunately, the court systems still rely on that physical evidence. And I know it's embarrassing and it's degrading, and you have to tell people that, like I said, to be honest, the people that I dealt with in the police department, I trusted them more than my own family and friends at the time, because they were willing to listen. These are trained professionals that are trained in sexual assault trauma and treating victims. And those healthcare professionals know how to assist in those situations. And I would highly encourage, if anyone is in that situation at any given time, is the best thing you can do is report and get the evidence collected as fast as possible, because that is your best chance of seeking justice in your own case.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do think that's excellent advice. And just like you said, if you go out with 5 people, make sure that you're coming back with 5 people. Most instances where I see there are problems within fraternity and sorority life, for whatever reason, they lost track of one person. And then we find out the next day that something happened. So there has to be that accountability that we're coming back with everybody. And if not, where is that person? Let's go find them.
Exactly. 100% is, like I went to that one party with 4 people,
Mhm.
and I was the only one left up there. And everyone after that played dumb and didn't want to associate with me anymore after that. Like, oh, well, you were the kid who stayed at that party and bad things happened to you and it's your fault, And, I was 21 years old. I didn't know what was going on. I don't know everything now in my life at 32. You can bet your butt I didn't know anything when I was 21 either, right? But and there's apps out now. I mean, smartphones are amazing. You have buddy tracking apps, and you can track your friends and where they are. But like I said, always have 1 or 2 people, whether it's your roommate, that you're sharing your dorm room with, or whatever else it is that you can 100%. You have a plan before you leave. Anytime you're going out or any kind of party is, okay, we're going to go to this party. We're probably going to be drinking. We're probably going to be doing dumb things. But at 10 p.m., set an alarm on your phone that we text each other to know where we are. Right? At midnight, we're going to do the same thing, and if I don't respond or you don't respond, the find my phone or find my friend that's already on iPhones. I mean, you can go find out where that person is. So make sure you each have access to know each other's location if that's what you decide is the plan. It's a great way of staying in contact with each other. And if something does go bad, somebody can try to find you.
Yeah, I love that. It's excellent advice. So I'm just curious. I mean, you've been through the ringer. This sounds like, a best-selling book to me already. What does the future look like for Adam DeRito? Where do we go from here?
So for me, at 32, I had to accept a lot of things in my life. Even if the military came back and said you can go fly tomorrow, it would be a hard thing for me to do. I have an amazing fiance. She's been waiting to get married but she knows, she's like, we need to finish your case and get this off your shoulders, because we want to actually have fun at our wedding with our friends and family, not your friends and family constantly criticizing you about your Air Force Academy case, right? But the fun thing is for me is, we actually started homesteading out here in Colorado a little bit. So we actually both work in the energy industry, and we started raising chickens and growing a victory garden. And it's actually an amazing hobby. And we started it right before COVID happened. So once COVID-19 happened, it just reinforced our willingness to try to grow food outside. So for me, I have an amazing job at a refinery here in Denver as an industrial wastewater specialist. I love my job there. I have no intention of leaving it. I love where I live. Hopefully I can start a family in the future. And but as for the Army, I'm still pushing for my commission and my chain of command. Like I said, we were talking, I'm actually leaving for my yearly training tomorrow. So I get to go play Army for the next 2 weeks. They're 100% supportive of my case. They want to see me win it, but they're actually pushing for me to become a commissioned officer in that unit. So, all in all, I might be the 10-year lieutenant, so to speak, after all of this. And, like you said, hopefully I'll be able to write more about this in the future and help educate people on perseverance through things like this. And we're hoping that, we are really hoping that our justice system does what it's supposed to do. This is a very clear-cut case for us. I mean, it's a constitutional right violation. We have the black and white evidence. We don't even need to call witnesses. It's 3 pieces of paper. Discharged on this date. You falsified on this date. Should have a medical license, because if an Air Force affiliated doctor is admitting that I was wrongfully diagnosed with several conditions, then what else can't the Air Force do to people, right? And why did they change them in the first place? We discussed that, NCAA sports, and reforming that process. So I would love to be an advocate for helping reforming the military academies, helping civilian college campuses realize that, you can still play sports and not commit sexual assault, and understanding, the dichotomies of how to develop those systems and those programs, moving forward will not only benefit our military, but also benefit the NCAA environment as well. Because at the end, we need to hold these people accountable.
Mm-hmm.
Our hope is that we will get a law passed or changed throughout the court system that's going to state precedents that no, the military does not have the right to change anyone's medical records because they feel like it, because that sounds kind of draconian at the end of the day. And also, we want to encourage people who are, in civilians or in college to still join the military. It's an all-volunteer force, right? I promise you, I know maybe this story may dissuade people from wanting to join the military, but I'm still wearing the uniform. I still love this country. I still love the mission that I serve, because I do believe that the mission that we are doing overseas currently, in certain areas of the world, is 100% necessary. Not only for our security, but also for the humanitarian reasons of, people that really do need help. I wish people would see more of that aspect of the military, seeing that the humanitarian aid that we provide and helping people that really need help. So encouraging other college students to maybe explore a career in the military afterwards, but also, like I said, ensuring that their rights are protected, because as members of the military, we are sworn to protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We would just hope that those constitutional rights are also upheld to its own members that are serving to protect it.
I love it. It's a great message. I really do hope that you become a commissioned officer. I really do hope that you get the reforms that you're looking for, because I believe in what you're trying to do. And I hope you continue to talk about it. It's very brave of you to come out and talk about all of these events that have happened to you. I think your message resonates with college students. And I think the reforms you're talking about, whether it be to the military academy, to NCAA athletes, I mean, this is relevant stuff right now. And I love what you're doing. I love your story. And I just think you're going to help a lot of people going forward. Your future is very bright, I can assure you.
Well, Mike, I really appreciate that. And if your listeners are really interested in looking more of the case or the actual evidence, I would invite them to visit www.adamderito.com. You can connect with me on Instagram at just adam.derito, or you can follow me on Twitter at Adam DeRito. It's pretty simple. I'm the only one out there. But I'm constantly trying to give updates about my case. Sometimes I send some cool pictures of me jumping out of airplanes, is what should I get to do tomorrow. And feel free to contact me. If you are a survivor of sexual assault, and military or not, you can talk to me at any time. I'm an open book. Like I said, the person who introduced me to you is a person that we've helped each other through our experiences of sexual assault over the years. And it's life-changing. You need that community of survivors to help push change, because without the willingness of people to push change, the change is just never going to happen. So
you were a big help to our mutual friend. So I just have to say thank you, because I care an awful lot about this person, and you were a great help. So thank you. We love good food here at Fraternity Foodie, so I would be remiss if we didn't talk about food for at least one question. So what is your favorite restaurant that I should check out the next time I'm in the Denver area? Where should I go?
So I had to think a lot about this question. It was actually the only question I got stuck on for a good minute, because so for me, I'm from the East Coast, right? So I'm spoiled at how amazing seafood is on the East Coast, being from New York, New Jersey. And I don't recommend the seafood in Colorado. Don't do it. It's a landlocked state. But there is this one restaurant. It's called STK, and it is an amazing steak restaurant. I don't know where they get their meat, but it must be right across the street from my house, apparently. But the way they age their meat, they age their steaks. The atmosphere is absolutely amazing. It's very artistic. And the servers are great. They're very knowledgeable about their wines. They match everything perfectly there. And I have never had a bad experience there, and everything's perfect every time. So STK and Steakhouse in Denver is what I 100% recommend if you're out here. And if you're out here, please let me know and hit me up. I
will definitely hit you up. So we'll go to STK. We'll see if it's any good. I mean, you're talking to a New York City steakhouse, connoisseur, all right?
I know.
So we're going to see if this stacks up.
I know. It's definitely not the Delmonico family, right? So
well, listen, it was great getting to know you a little bit here today. I wish you all the best going forward. If there's anything that I can do for you, please let us know. And then for our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed this. Please like and share this, so that way Adam's message gets out to the masses. It's important that more people hear this important story. And thank you so much for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Fraternity Foodie. Bye for now.